A question has been brought before the throne, a question of timing and covenant. The inquirer asked YHWH, "Did my biological dad come back to my mother, but she had already married Dallas Thomas James?" The drawn text opens with the voice of the scoffers from Psalms chapter 94, verse 7. "Still they say, YHWH will not see, neither will the Elohim of Jacob regard it." That lament sets the frame for everything that follows, because the entire drawing of 100 verses rises to answer that charge. YHWH does see. He has searched and known the hidden turns of a family story, as we hear in Psalms chapter 139, verse 1. "O YHWH, you have searched me and known me." The narrative of timing unfolds across the draw like the turning of seasons. In the days of Noah, the waters turned back after the end of 150 days, as Genesis chapter 8, verse 3 records. Rebekah carried twins, and the time of birth came at its appointed hour, from Genesis chapter 25, verse 24. When YHWH determined to bring Israel out of Egypt, he declared through Moses, "Now shall you see what I will do," from Exodus chapter 6, verse 1. These texts together testify that returns in covenant history rarely arrive before the appointed season has fully run its course. The biological father's return fits this pattern. It came, but after the marriage covenant with Dallas Thomas James was already established. Consider the story of the Shunammite woman in 2 Kings chapter 8, verse 1. Elisha warned her that YHWH had called for a famine of 7 years, and she sojourned wherever she could. When she returned after the appointed time, her land and home had been occupied by another, and she had to appeal to the king for restoration. She did not remarry in that account, yet the principle is plain: a divinely permitted absence can create a gap in which another takes possession. In your mother's story, the possession was a lawful marriage, a covenant recognized in the eyes of heaven even as the first husband eventually returned. The draw emphasizes inheritance and priestly allotment. Land was divided by lot in Shiloh before YHWH, at the entrance of the priestly tabernacle at the appointed place, as Joshua chapter 19, verse 51 declares. Covenantal boundaries are drawn at specific times and cannot be unwound by a late arrival. The affirmative direction is further confirmed by the voice of the draw as a whole. The thematic polarity tilts toward covenantal favor, with far more markers of sacred action and prophetic guidance than of covenant breach. The inheritance channel alone registered at 4.0 sigma, anchoring the weight of the draw in the question of what belongs to whom. Deuteronomy chapter 24, verse 19 provides for the fatherless and the widow with the blessing of YHWH, implying that those left behind in a season of absence are not abandoned but provided for within new structures. The marriage to Dallas Thomas James, then, was not an interruption of blessing but a new covenantal reality formed in the window of the father's departure. And yet, the father did return, just as Israel was gathered back from among the nations, as Ezekiel chapter 39, verse 27 promises. But the first inhabitation had already occurred, as 1 Chronicles chapter 9, verse 2 notes. No word of affirmation comes without a pastoral caution, and the draw supplies one. The lead verse's indictment, YHWH will not see, is answered not with a simple yes but with a cascade of severe warnings. Jeremiah chapter 19, verse 12 speaks of making the city like Tophet. Revelation chapter 14, verse 19 casts the vine of the earth into the great winepress of the wrath of Elohim. Ezekiel chapter 44, verse 12 condemns priests who caused Israel to stumble. These are not threats directed at the inquirer. They stand as a solemn fence around the answer. They caution against the very doubt expressed in the lead verse. Do not conclude from the tangled timeline that YHWH was absent or that he abandoned you. The draw reached strong anomaly classification under the Shield protocol. The data shows a statistically confirmed non-random pattern across multiple independent channels. The triple convergence of identity, inheritance, and priesthood exceeded the strong anomaly threshold at 7.34 sigma, and survived correction for false discovery. The global anomaly test yielded an extreme result. This is not a claim of divine authorship from the statistics alone, but it is a robust pattern that calls for reverent attention. The pastoral warning is this: the seeing God who marked the sequence also sees the heart's response to that sequence. Bitterness toward the mother, contempt for Dallas Thomas James, or despair over the father's late return would be a return to the scoffer's creed. Instead, the text bids you hope in Elohim, from Psalms chapter 43, verse 5, and take the cup of salvation, from Psalms chapter 116, verse 13, from the hand that has known your frame and your history. A genuine tension must be named. The drawer contains Job's cry that his flesh upon him will have pain, and his mind within him will mourn, from Job chapter 14, verse 22. It holds the psalmist's night-long cry, O Elohim of my salvation, I have cried day and night before you, from Psalms chapter 88, verse 1. An affirmative answer to the question of timing does not erase the grief of a father who came back too late, a mother whose life moved forward, or a child who navigated the space between two covenants. The drawer acknowledges that pain exists within the appointed season. A plausible alternative reading might suggest the return was spiritual or incomplete, but the weight of the timing thread and the direct affirmation of the deterministic verdict tilt the scale toward an actual, historical return after the marriage to Dallas Thomas James. The verdict is lean yes, not an absolute certainty, and is offered in the spirit of Joel's ministers weeping between the porch and the altar, as Moses and Aaron came out and blessed the people in Leviticus chapter 9, verse 23, interceding for a people whose story is known to YHWH. What remains unshaken is your own identity and inheritance. The triple convergence of identity, inheritance, and priesthood pointed not at the parents' choices but at you. You are a letter of Messiah written not with ink but with the Spirit of the living Elohim, as 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verses 3 and 4 tell us. The consecration of the priest in Leviticus chapter 12, verse 7 speaks of cleansing and propitiatory covering, a word for the one born into this history, not defiled by it. The sifting of Amos chapter 9, verse 9 promises that not a grain will fall to the ground. Your life is that grain, preserved through the sieve of human frailty. The Father's answer to your question is yes, with all the sorrow and all the sovereignty that such a yes entails. The ark has entered the camp, but direction belongs to the word and to the verdict it has yielded. Let your latter times be governed by the counsel and correction of Proverbs chapter 19, verse 20, and your hope fixed on the consolation of Israel, as Simeon waited in Luke chapter 2, verse 25, who has seen, who has known, and who has already clothed your mortal story in the promise of incorruption from 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 54. So the answer is yes. Your biological father came back, but your mother was already married to Dallas Thomas James. YHWH saw it all. He has searched you and known you, and your standing is secure in him. Let hope in Elohim be the health of your countenance, now and always. Amen. The verses drawn in this Shield 17.14 session were Psalms chapter 94, verse 7, Luke chapter 4, verse 20, Jeremiah chapter 19, verse 12, 1 Chronicles chapter 9, verse 2, 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 3-4, Amos chapter 9, verse 7. This concludes today's interpretation under the Shield Protocol.